Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Today's story kicks off in a big box store optical department where our OP, a patient glasses expert, crossed paths with an unshakable Karen on a mission to defy the laws of physics and geometry. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Customer can't understand why her glasses don't fit. I sell glasses in a big box store. I had a 60-something lady come in that basically had the condescending, "I've never worked a day in my life, so I'm above you" attitude about her. You know the type. The arm had snapped off her glasses, and she wanted to know if I could put her lenses in a new frame. This isn't an uncommon request in itself. They didn't come from our shop originally, so I explained that the lens has to be a very close match to the new frame, and it can be hard to find that because suppliers like to use different patterns, so you have to go back to the original shop. I'm still happy to see if I can find her one, though. I go over and start seeing if there's one I can make work. This is like hunting a needle in a haystack, and there are usually only one or two frames at most that will work. Basically, you have to take what you can get, and it's rarely the ideal color or style. Her original frame is a narrow rectangle. The lens size is 52 millimeters wide and maybe 32 millimeters tall at most. Most optical frames have the width stamped on the inside, so she sees a 52 on the inside of hers. She pulls down this massive cat eye frame. It's in the 45 millimeter tall range. Her lens is a skinny rectangle. This is a tall trapezoid. This says 52 on the inside. Mine says 52 on the inside. They're the same size. I want these. I'm dumbfounded, but try to be as polite as I can. I reply, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but 52 is the width of the lens. While these two have the same width, they don't have the same height. Your lens is way too small for this frame. We'll have to go with a shorter one that's closer to a rectangle." This was not acceptable. She reiterates, "This says 52, mine is 52, they are the same size. 52 and 52 are the same number." "Ma'am, I understand that, but 52 is the width. These lenses are not even close to the same shape." I even hold her lens up to the taller one to show her. "I have no way to stretch your lens. That's not something that can be done. We have to find one closer to the same height and shape." "But they both say 52. "What don't you understand about that? 52 and 52 are the same. It's the same size. Why can't you seem to understand that?" She says this like I'm a moron who probably can't even count to 52. This lady seemed to think she'd found some archaic knowledge by matching these two numbers, like it was a shoe size. If it matches, it works. After about 10 minutes of back and forth with two co-workers backing me up, she just refused to believe me and left in a huff. I like to imagine she struggled with fitting the square block through the circular hole as a child. Wow, the audacity and stubbornness some people bring to the table is just mind-boggling. This lady was fully convinced she'd cracked the Da Vinci Code of eyeglass sizing with her magical number-matching logic. Forget lens shape, height, or, basic physics. 52's 52. And apparently you're the one who doesn't get it. And our second story. Timekeeper's obsession with outdated forms leads to her own downfall. When I was quite a bit younger, I transferred from a position with a federal agency into a civilian position in a military organization, civil engineers. Think a large construction company, but with military bosses and some military co-workers. At the end of my first month, the civilian timekeeper, who was in her late 60s, handed me a bunch of forms to fill out, records of time spent on tasks, hours of work, etc., which should have been filled daily. Not only that, these forms had long been abandoned by the agency from where I came, and as far as I knew, every other agency in the government. When I asked why I had to fill them out, pointing out that other agencies didn't use the forms anymore, I was told, quite snottily, to just do it because we've always done it this way. Okay, I thought, being new to the organization, so I spent about 3 hours filling out the forms by reviewing my personal records, etc. I handed them back to the timekeeper, who in turn made a really biting comment about these new young guys wanting to change things, loud enough for the entire Office of Civilian Support Staff to hear, many of whom were in her age group, and which got her a few laughs. Because the military bosses rotated in and out every 2 years or so and/or were often deployed, they were very dependent on the civilian staff to keep the place running and knew little about civilian procedures, much less question them. I knew it would be pointless to go to them about the forums and the time wasted every month, so I asked casually of the civilian HR group, outside section which handled all civilian issues for the entire establishment, if they had ever thought of using computerized time forms instead of the paper forms the civil engineers were using. As a longtime federal employee, I knew a direct approach or complaint would cause me some grief. My contact was shocked to learn these forms were still being used and, worse still, that the timekeeper's entire workload was the distribution, collection, and filing of these forms. Soon afterwards, the engineers had to downsize the civilian workforce, and surprise, surprise, the timekeeper position was the first one put on the chopping block. She was let go soon after the cuts were implemented, but not before she had to arrange for and supervise the shredding of filing cabinets full of her precious forms. Now, I may not have questioned the process either had I been told to do daily entry and had gotten a bit of respect. Honestly, the timekeeper seems like one of those people who clings to obsolete processes because it gives them a sense of control, even if it wastes everyone else's time. Her loud, snarky attitude probably didn't win her any allies either. It's satisfying to see that her position, which was entirely built around an antiquated system, ended up being deemed unnecessary. And our last story. Karen built a fence on my property, so I took it down. My neighbor Karen has been a thorn in my side for years. She's the type of person who thrives on creating chaos and making everyone around her miserable. When we first moved in, I tried to be friendly and neighborly, but it quickly became clear that Karen's idea of getting along meant doing everything her way and bending over backward to accommodate her outrageous demands. For example, one summer, she marched over to my door and said, "You need to stop inviting guests over. You're too loud, and this neighborhood has standards. If you don't stop, I'll call the police." Mind you, it wasn't like we were throwing wild parties. We'd hosted a small barbecue for family, and the loudest noise was probably my toddler laughing at the bubbles we were blowing. Another time I woke up to find my garden gnomes missing. When I asked Karen about it, she said, "Oh, I took them. They don't fit the aesthetic of this neighborhood. It's embarrassing." She genuinely thought she was doing me and the neighborhood a favor by stealing them. I demanded them back. After much arguing, she threw them over the fence, breaking two in the process. And then there was the time she complained about our trash cans being too visible. She knocked on our door ranting about how everyone else in the neighborhood keeps their bins hidden, even though our cans were tucked neatly at the side of our house. She threatened to report us to the HOA, only to be reminded that we don't even have one. But the biggest issue came up recently. A property dispute. Karen claimed that part of our yard was actually hers and started talking about putting up a fence to reclaim her land. I knew she was full of it, but to settle things once and for all, I hired a surveyor. Turns out the land was 100% mine. Karen, of course, wasn't satisfied. She insisted the surveyor must have made a mistake and hired her own surveyor. The result's the same as mine. The land was mine. I thought that would be the end of it, but no, this is Karen we're talking about. A week later, I came home to find workers putting up a fence right through my property. The workers' van didn't have any logos or company information, and the men themselves looked more like a group of friends than professional contractors. I approached them and said, "Hey, this is my property. You can't build a fence here." One of the guys shrugged and said, "We're just doing what we were paid to do. Take it up with her." I marched over to Karen's house and knocked on the door. She opened it with her usual smug expression. "Karen, what's going on? You can't just build a fence on my property. We've been through this. The surveys prove it's mine." She rolled her eyes. "I know my property. If you're so worried about a little fence, call the police on me." At that point, I realized reasoning with her was pointless. I decided to document everything before taking any action. Over the next few days, I took photos of the fence, the workers, and their van. I even recorded conversations with Karen where she outright admitted she didn't care about the surveys. We waited until the fence was fully built. Then, when Karen and her family were out, I hired my own workers to dismantle it. It took them just a few hours to undo what it'd take Karen's crew a week to put up. I kept all the materials on my property for safekeeping in case I needed them for evidence. That evening, there was a loud banging on my door. It was Karen with a police officer in tow. "This man is vandalizing my property," she screeched, pointing at me like she'd just caught me red-handed. The officer turned to me. "Sir, we've had a report of vandalism. Can you explain what's going on?" I calmly handed him copies of the property surveys along with photos of the fence being built on my property. I also showed him the videos of Karen admitting she didn't care about the legal boundaries. The officer's demeanor shifted immediately. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Karen, "based on this evidence, it appears the fence was constructed on his property without permission." "But he tore it down," Karen yelled, her face turning red. "On his property," the officer clarified, "which he's allowed to do. If you want to pursue this further, you'll need to go to court." And that's exactly what I did. I filed an injunction against Karen, preventing her from attempting to build anything else on my property. The court sided with me, ordering Karen to reimburse me for the cost of dismantling the fence and the legal fees I incurred. Karen tried to act like the victim for weeks afterward, complaining to anyone who would listen about her terrible neighbor. But by then, everyone in the neighborhood knew what kind of person she was, and her sob story didn't get much sympathy. Wow. Karen sounds like the type of neighbor you hear about in nightmare stories. Just an endless fountain of entitlement and drama. From stealing garden gnomes to trying to rewrite property lines, it's like she's actively competing for the Worst Neighbor of the Year award. The audacity to hire a crew and build a fence after 2 surveys proved she was in the wrong? That's some next-level delusion. It's satisfying to know you not only got justice, but also showed the whole neighborhood exactly who Karen is. She really tried to make you the villain, but instead she got stuck footing the bill for her nonsense. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.